Hi, Imanara. Sometimes I think back to that night and wonder if betrayal has a sound. Because for me, it wasn't shouting or breaking glass or even the slamming of a door. It was silence. Heavy, suffocating silence that told me I no longer belonged. My parents believed my sister's lies without hesitation. They kicked me out like I was a stranger without warning while I was still carrying the child of a billionaire. They didn't even flinch when they called me unstable, dramatic, dangerous to the family's reputation. But exile wasn't the worst of it. The worst was erasure. They deleted my name from the family trust. They replaced my face in old photographs, cropping me out as if I'd never existed. And then, what cut deepest, they took my life's work, every idea, every sacrifice, every late night I'd poured my soul into, and handed it all to her, to my sister, as if it had always been hers. I stood in the shadows of the auditorium one evening and watched her bask in applause that wasn't meant for her. My mother clapped until her palms were red, beaming, as though she hadn't watched me bleed for that same dream. And in that moment, something in me broke cleanly, like glass under too much pressure. They begged me later, of course they did, but by then I had already built a life where their names held no weight, where their approval meant nothing. Do you know what it feels like to be erased from your own story, to become a ghost haunting the edges of a family portrait? I do. I remember every detail of the day it all began to unravel. The exact warmth in the Scottsdale spring air, an almost artificial kind of comfort, the kind that fools you into believing things are fine. The dryness of the air that made even crying feel impossible. I remember pulling into their driveway, staring at those stucco walls, that low porch lamp, the way a condemned prisoner must stare at the doors of a courtroom. My father's text still buzzed in my head. Dinner at 5, just the 5 of us. Harmless, casual. The kind of message he'd send before sharing trivial news about taxes or the neighbors. Nothing in those words hinted at betrayal. And yet something in me buzzed off key. I ignored it, convincing myself it would be another evening of Callista dominating the table. My mother's smile stretched thin, my father retreating into silence. But the moment I stepped through the door, I knew. There was no roasted chicken scent, no clatter of dishes, no soft jazz humming from Dad's old playlist. Just silence. My mother perched on the edge of the couch, hands folded, tight eyes fixed downward. My father didn't move. And Callista. Callista looked radiant, like a queen who already knew the verdict of the trial. Perfect blouse, smug little smile. A gleam in her eyes that told me she had been waiting for this. "You're late?" Dad said, his voice flat, his gaze carefully avoiding mine. I froze in the foyer, clutching my bag strap too tightly. "Traffic," I answered, forcing lightness into my voice. My throat felt dry. I thought we were eating. "There's no dinner," Callista said smoothly, cutting in like a knife. "Just a discussion." That word discussion had always been a weapon in our family, a polished prelude to punishment. I scanned the room again, my chest tightening. No plates, no glasses. Just a duffel bag set near the hallway. My duffel bag. The low hum in my ears sharpened into a ringing. Dad leaned forward, placing a printed sheet of paper on the coffee table as though it were evidence in a trial. "Your name's on a withdrawal from the trust," he said coldly. "March 3rd, $5,000. My jaw locked. I didn't. "Don't lie," Mom whispered without looking up. Her voice cracked, but she didn't lift her eyes. "It's already been verified." Verified by whom? I demanded, my voice shaking. Callista leaned back, feigning innocence. "She's been using the funds without telling us. And it's not just that." She tilted her head, letting the venom drip slowly. "I found out she's been seeing Dr. Nolan, the married one, from Banner Hospital." For a second, I forgot how to breathe. The lie was so grotesque, so far-fetched, I actually blinked in disbelief. "You think I'd mess around with a married man?" "Seriously, don't raise your voice." Dad snapped sharper this time. And in that moment, standing in the same house where I had once been a daughter, a sister, a part of something that felt like family, I realized I had already been replaced. Dad snapped his tone sharp enough to slice through the silence. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt, my world spinning on an axis I no longer recognized. I looked around at the faces of people who once framed my crooked little drawings on the refrigerator, the same people who used to call me the smart one. Their pride, their hope. But now, not one of them could meet my eyes. You don't even want to hear my side. My voice cracked raw, almost childlike, begging for anything that resembled fairness. We already talked about it. Dad said flatly, like a judge announcing a sentence. We've made a decision. It was then Mom finally lifted her gaze. Not with the fire of anger or the sting of disappointment, but with something worse, emptiness. Her face was vacant, as if someone had hollowed her out. We think it's best if you leave tonight, she murmured. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was heavy, a balloon swelling between us, pressing down on my chest until it hurt to breathe. I turned toward the duffel bag by the hall. Already packed. My throat closed. You packed my things? I whispered my words, barely scraping the air. Callista crossed her arms, her smugness a knife she didn't even try to hide. We figured it'd be easier this way. I walked past them down the hallway where echoes of my childhood still lived. Except they didn't, not anymore. My bedroom walls were bare, stripped clean, like I had never existed there at all. The door to the garage stood open, and in its dim light I caught sight of Dad standing by the trash can tossing something inside. It was my photo album. The one I'd made in middle school with crooked cutouts, messy labels, and glitter that never quite stuck. My whole childhood bound in cheap paper and glue. Seriously? My voice trembled. He shrugged his indifference, colder than any anger. Didn't think you'd need it where you're going. I didn't cry. Not then. I swallowed the lump in my throat, picked up my keys, and walked past them, each step heavier than the last. I got in my car and drove. No map, no destination, just the blur of desert air folding into streetlights. Neon signs and the ache in my chest that wouldn't go away. Hours later, I pulled into a motel off McDowell Road, the kind with a flickering vacancy sign and rooms that smelled of stale air and resignation. The air conditioner rattled louder than the TV, but I didn't care. I didn't even unpack. I collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of a machine that didn't care if I stayed or disappeared. The next morning, I woke to a sharp cramp in my gut, not the emotional kind, but something deeper, heavier, as if my own body was reminding me of the life I carried inside. My heart pounded as I reached for my phone. Out of instinct, I checked my bank account. My name was gone from the family trust, just erased. I opened the estate documents stored in my cloud drive only to find myself locked out. Panic clamped down on me. I called the family's lawyer, someone who had once been like an uncle to us. She sighed, her voice tired, resigned. It was all handled internally yesterday, she said. Handled internally. That was when it hit me with brutal clarity this wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision. This was planned. Orchestrated. My parents and my sister had sat around tables, whispered behind doors, plotted this out like a strategy. The dinner, that so-called discussion, wasn't the decision. It was the final act, the performance, the curtain call. I sank back onto the motel bed phone, sliding from my hand. The ache in my chest spread dull and merciless. This wasn't just about paperwork or money. My name, my place, my history. It had all been scrubbed away as if I had never mattered, as if my existence was an inconvenience too messy to keep. By evening, I found myself standing outside the motel room, car keys in one hand, my entire uncertain future clutched in the other. I had nowhere to go, no one waiting for me. Just me, the child inside me and the vast emptiness of a world that had turned its back. Night didn't bring peace. It only swapped one kind of noise for another. The rattle of the air conditioner became a lonely heartbeat. The streetlight outside buzzed through the thin curtains, casting ghostly shadows on the wall like an old TV left on mute. And I lay there listening, knowing that the silence of my family had followed me here too. I lay on a couch that was too short for me, my legs dangling awkwardly over the armrest, staring at the textured ceiling like it might hold answers. The plaster bumps and shadows became constellations of strangers' endings, and I found myself wondering how many other people had seen their families vanish in rooms like this. How many had lain awake rehearsing conversations that would never happen, trying to stitch themselves back into lives that had already been cut apart? I hadn't told anyone yet. Not Corwin. Not the handful of friends who still existed in my contacts, but not in my reality names that sat on my phone like ghosts of another life. On paper, I wasn't homeless. Technically, I was staying at Monique's apartment in Tempe. She was out of town, her old lease overlapping with her new place. Out of kindness or pity, she'd texted me the door code and said, "Feel free, make yourself at home." Home. I wasn't between jobs. I was between lives, between identities, hovering in the no man's land of who I used to be and who I might become. That night, I curled up on the couch, clutched my phone, and did the one thing I had promised myself I wouldn't. I opened Instagram. And there it was. My family. Gathered in the backyard under soft strings of paper lanterns, the glow warm and inviting. Callista in the center, radiant as always, raising her glass like she'd earned the throne. My father beside her, smiling with the ease of a man whose world had no cracks. My mother, mid-laugh, eyes crinkling at something just outside the frame. The caption was as hollow as it was cruel. J family, first. Henwick traditions, she's spring vibes. I blinked. Not because I was surprised I was past surprise, but because my eyes had gone dry from staring too long. There was no mention of me. No empty chair. No acknowledgement. Just a family photo polished and whole as though I had never been part of it at all. Later, after I washed the day off with a half-empty travel-size shampoo I'd been hoarding since summer camp 15 years ago, I made another mistake. I opened Facebook. I hadn't posted there in years, but my parents still used it. Still curated our family narrative for old friends and relatives. A new album gleamed on their page, family trip to Sedona. My heart dropped. I remembered that trip like it was yesterday. I had been the one who found the Airbnb, who planned the itinerary, who begged everyone to come. The desert sun, the canyon breeze, the grilled dinners under a sky littered with stars. I could still feel the ache in my legs from hiking trails too steep, the laughter we shared when Mom lost her hat to the wind. But in this album, I wasn't there. Not blurred, not cropped, just gone. In one picture, Callista posed in front of the red rocks with our mother. I remembered that exact moment. I had been the one holding the camera, handing them smoothies, saying, "Hold still, the light's perfect." But the photo now was different. The angle shifted as if I had never been the one behind the lens. Another shot showed Dad at the grill. I remembered the 4 chairs around the patio table that night. In this version, there were only 3. I stared at the screen until my own reflection stared back, wide-eyed, hollow, disbelieving. Part of me, some desperate corner of my brain, clung to the hope that I was mistaken. That maybe memory had tricked me. But I wasn't wrong. I dug into my tote bag, pulled out the backup drive I carried everywhere more out of paranoia than necessity. Plugging it into Monique's laptop, I navigated to the folder marked Sedona Trip. There I was. Sunburned my hair, frizzed from the canyon winds, wrapped in a hoodie that wasn't even mine, laughing at something no one else could see. Messy, imperfect, alive. The truth hit me so hard I almost gasped. They hadn't just erased me from their house. They had rewritten the past. I sat frozen, staring at the proof. Every cut of scissors, every digital erasure, every curated memory screamed the same thing: you never existed. The next morning, my phone buzzed. A notification from a local group chat I'd forgotten to mute. A video link. Captioned in bold letters, "Unbelievable." She really did that. The words glared at me from the group chat as I tapped the video link with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. The footage opened grainy, like it had been passed through too many hands. The angle was immediately familiar, our living room's corner camera. In the video, I stood in the frame, my body taut, my voice raised. My father sat calmly like a man made of stone while my mother looked small and distressed on the couch. For the first 5 seconds, there was no sound, just flickering silence. Then abruptly, a jarring audio clip cut in. "You're all liars." It was my voice. Except it wasn't not from that night. They had stitched it together, cut and spliced like a cruel editor telling a story I never lived. Old conversations cannibalized for new lies. A clip where I was grabbing a folder for work now made me look like I was ripping something away in anger. A snippet of me arguing over Thanksgiving cranberry sauce? No. That's not how you do it was rethreaded into a tantrum about money. The image of me on screen wasn't me anymore. It was a villain crafted from fragments, a puppet version of myself polished to confirm the story they wanted the world to believe. By noon, the fallout began. 2 of my freelance clients, people I depended on, emailed to say they were reassessing vendor relationships. Another didn't bother with words, just unfollowed me, a silent cutting of ties. Desperate, I called Rachel, the girl I'd once shared a tiny apartment with in grad school, the one who had held my hair back after too many celebratory drinks. "Hey," I said, softly, almost pleading. Silence. Finally, her voice came hesitant, cracked by something I couldn't name. "Anara, this stuff online. Is it true?" "No," I whispered, my throat burning. "None of it." There was a pause then, another longer this time, like she was searching for courage she didn't want to find. It's hard to know what's real anymore. You know? She hadn't meant it as a knife, but it landed like one. I thanked her anyway, because what else was there to say? I hung up, set the phone down, and stared at the wall until it blurred. They hadn't just exiled me. They hadn't only pushed me out of their circle. They had rewritten me, edited me, recast me. I wasn't being erased, I was being replaced. And then, as if the universe wanted to underline the cruelty of it all, I found myself in a rental bathroom, the buzzing fluorescent light above me stuttering in and out. My breath came shallow, uneven, as I stared at the pregnancy test in my hands. 2 pink lines. At first faint, then steady. Slow like a secret, deciding if it wanted to be known. I didn't look away. I couldn't. I sat on the edge of that public toilet seat, knees clamped together, both hands gripping the plastic stick like it might float away if I blinked too long. 2 pink lines. Clear, unshakable, alive. The light above flickered again, buzzing in protest, but I barely heard it, for the first time since the night I'd been cast out my body. Settled. Not joy. Not grief. Just stillness, a moment of being held by something bigger than myself. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed. Not for them, not for me. For this, for the small, invisible future rooting itself inside me without permission, without apology. Slowly I rose, shoved the test and its wrapper deep into the trash, and stepped back into the world. The parking lot stretched wide before me, the strip mall bathed in the last orange light of the sun. Long shadows fell across the concrete, reaching toward me like something waiting. Maybe it was the air that changed. Or maybe it was me. Back inside Monique's apartment, I dropped my keys on the counter. The fridge offered little comfort: mustard, a few eggs, a box of leftover rice turning stale in the corner. I wasn't hungry anyway. Hunger felt too small compared to the clarity that had settled in me. I had no plan, no job, no trust fund, no home. But for the first time, I had something that felt like direction. A truth no one could Photoshop away. I poured a glass of water and sat in the quiet. Then my phone vibrated. I wasn't expecting anything. No one had texted me in 2 days except spam. But this was different. A voice note. From Aunt Zelda. A near smile tugged at me. She had always been the quiet one. The one who slipped me extra pie slices when no one was looking. The one who tucked a $20 into my graduation card, even though she couldn't really afford it. I pressed play. There was a pause on the other end before her voice came through. A clink of a wine glass, then her voice lower than usual, almost like she didn't want to be overheard. "She's too much trouble," the voice said flatly, cold as glass. "The more we feed into her drama, the longer she lingers. It's better this way. Best let her disappear quietly." For a second, I thought I'd misheard. Then faint in the background, another voice slipped through Callista's. I would have known it anywhere, even whispered, even years from now. And then came Isolde, clipped and sure of herself. She was always the odd one out anyway. Grandma just pandered to her. Now we're cleaning it up. The words didn't just sting, they hollowed me. My fingers froze around the phone. I replayed the message once, twice again, hoping the syllables would shift, that somehow my mind had bent them into something crueler than they were. But no, the words stayed the same. The tone stayed the same. The sting stayed the same. I sat by the window staring out at a world that kept turning without me. Somewhere people were rinsing dinner plates, folding warm laundry, checking their kids' math homework, kissing their partners goodnight. Somewhere life was ordinary. And in my world, someone I had once clung to like a lifeline, someone whose kindness I thought was my proof I wasn't crazy, had cut me loose. Worse, she hadn't even needed to take the scissors. She handed them to me and let me do the cutting myself. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't delete the message. Instead, I saved it, labeled it, archived it. Because in my life now, every truth mattered. Every scrap of evidence had to be preserved like a rare artifact. In their world, I was a story to erase. In mine, I was building a record that said I was here. This happened. That night, I stepped into Monique's small guest room, the one she used to fill with spare blankets and half-finished crafts. The sewing machine was still there, perched on a folding table. I pushed it aside, spread out a legal pad, and began writing. Dates, names, subtle shifts in tone. The moments I'd brushed off, the sideways glances, the conversations that now read like coded warnings. I wrote until my hand cramped, until the ink smudged, until exhaustion dragged me down. In the morning, I walked. Just a few blocks, but each step felt like a declaration. The women's clinic stood pale and quiet, painted in soft blues and greens. Inside, the receptionist smiled as though nothing in the world could be wrong. She handed me a clipboard. Under emergency contact, I left it blank. Under support system, I hovered my pen over the line, then skipped it. When they called the name I'd given Elena Morrisand, I followed the nurse into the back, answered the basic health questions, nodded when she spoke about folic acid, about vitamin D, about care and rest. No one asked about the father. For that small mercy, I was grateful. I wasn't ready to tell that story. Not yet. In the exam room, I perched on the crinkled white sheet, staring at a faded poster of prenatal development. The corners were curling the colors dulled by time. Still, it was something. A beginning, however worn. Back at the apartment, I slid the folder of clinic papers onto the table beside my laptop. No dramatic music swelled. No spotlight split the room. Just me, clean socks on my feet, and the whistle of a teapot on the stove. But something inside me shifted. I wasn't merely surviving anymore. I was beginning. I wasn't a liability. I wasn't the smudge in someone else's picture. I was a new sentence, one they couldn't edit no matter how many photos they cropped, no matter how many lies they stitched together. They had erased my name, but they'd forgotten one thing: I still had a voice. And then, without searching for it, a thread appeared. A sponsored ad slid between job listings and an article about prenatal vitamins. Its headline glowed on the screen, celebrating local women innovators. It felt almost random. Almost. But I knew better by now. Nothing is random when the world is daring you to rise. April 14th, Phoenix Civic Auditorium. Her name, Callista, was there bold and shining in the headline like it belonged to her alone. My hand trembled as I clicked. The photo that loaded was a wound I recognized instantly. I had taken it. That day, the afternoon sun had poured in through the lab's west-facing window, painting her profile in soft gold. She'd turned slightly left, her expression caught between thought and ease. I remembered adjusting the angle, telling her to hold still so the light would fall just right. It wasn't a staged photo shoot, just a handful of shots for a pitch deck I was building 2 years ago. She had asked almost offhandedly, saying she needed them for networking credibility. I believed her. I didn't imagine they'd end up here. The headline declared she was being honored for her contributions to women's health innovation. Below neat paragraphs unfurled her story, her new foundation, her vision, her impact. The page even linked to a video trailer, upbeat music, quick cuts of women in scrubs, smiling patients, inspirational text sliding across the screen. A legacy of compassion. I scrolled, searching, desperate. My name wasn't there. Not in the footnotes, not even in the acknowledgments. Nowhere. I refreshed the page. Once. Twice. A third time, as if the universe had glitched and forgotten me, as if maybe on the fourth attempt I'd reappear. But no. The silence of omission was louder than words. Shaking, I dug through old folders until I opened my portfolio archive, the one I hadn't touched in months because it hurt too much. The phrasing on her site matched mine almost word for word. Even the page design carried traces of my original draft, the clean blue-gray palette, the flow of sections, the voice. She hadn't just erased me. She'd stolen me. Dressed it all up with polished smiles, PowerPoint gloss, and applause waiting at the end of a stage. That night, I stacked 2 shoeboxes, balanced Monique's old laptop on top, and streamed the event live. Callista walked on stage in a blush pink blazer. Her nails gleamed, her posture flawless. The audience leaned in before she even spoke. This journey started with a simple question, she said, voice clear as glass. What if we could bring preventative care directly to the women who needed it most? I stopped breathing, because that wasn't her question. It was mine. It had been the heart of my graduate capstone project. The one she skimmed, glanced at, and waved away as too niche, too small to scale. But there it was, now polished, gift-wrapped, and reborn as her grand vision. Slide after slide, she spoke with conviction. My conviction. She dropped statistics, my statistics, from surveys I had designed and analyzed alone. She described field tests I had run under my own research account. She even unveiled the program name Bloomline, my name for it. The one I had whispered into being during long nights when I thought no one cared. I didn't rage. I didn't throw the laptop. I didn't scream. I just sat there and watched. Watched as the woman I once called my sister stood bathed in stage lights, collecting applause for work I had bled into in silence. And then, as if to drive the knife deeper, the camera panned across the audience. In the second row, exactly where she always sat, was our mother. Clapping with both hands, smiling wide. Behind her familiar faces appeared old family friends, one of Dad's former business partners. They nodded in unison as though they had always known Callista was destined for brilliance. Not one of them knew or cared whose brilliance she had borrowed. I closed the laptop before the Q&A even began. 3 days later, another headline surfaced. Callista Henwick launches nonprofit honoring her mother's legacy in women's health. The article showcased a glossy photo, Vera, our mother, holding a plaque donors, flanking her all smiles and champagne glow. The write-up spoke of core values rooted in a home led by a nurturing mother and a visionary daughter. I stared at the words until they blurred. Because that nonprofit wasn't born in their home. It had been built on the framework I drafted the fragile pilot model for a community health tool I had agonized over for months. The one I had emailed to Callista in confidence, asking if she thought it was viable to pivot the model toward public funding. I had trusted her with it. She'd answered briefly, dismissively, telling me not to overthink. And now it stood in the world with a logo, a website, and a full-page feature in the business journal. No one called me. No one asked. I didn't rage then either. Something colder had taken root, something sharp, quiet, and enduring. Not fire. Ice. It wasn't fury that filled me, no hot blaze of anger tearing through my chest. It was something quieter, stranger. A kind of suspension, like my whole body had stepped outside of itself and was floating above, watching the scene unfold on mute. Every sound, every thought seemed to come from far away, as if I had been wrapped in glass and left to observe without touching. That night, I didn't pour whiskey or drown myself in tears. I poured a glass of plain water, clear and steady in my hand, and sat down at my desk. I opened a blank email draft. My fingers hesitated above the keys, then began typing, not accusation, not rage, but fact. Calm, clinical, undeniable fact. The recipient, the director of the Phoenix Civic Innovation Board, the very organization that had just draped a medal around Callista's neck. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I attached a folder instead. A folder full of my life's work, original pitch decks, dated drafts, email chains, even cloud metadata stamped with my name. The subject line read only 2 words, request for clarification, and in the body of the email, 1 sentence. If this is your idea of ethical storytelling, I suggest you double-check who you're applauding. I didn't wait for a reply. I wasn't sure I needed one. Later, I found myself in the kitchen scribbling my name on a napkin with the back of a dull pen. For the first time, the letters didn't feel fragile. They didn't feel like a plea or a question. My name felt like a declaration. Then my inbox pinged. A new message slid in with the subject line, "Following up on your donation request." I frowned. I hadn't asked anyone for donations. The sender's name froze me in place, Dr. Patel, an old mentor from my university days, a man whose guidance had once kept me afloat when I nearly drowned in self-doubt. I hadn't spoken to him in months, maybe years. His message was polite, even warm. He thanked me for the detailed outreach proposal I'd apparently sent, then asked a few clarifying questions about my timeline for fund allocation. The problem, I hadn't written a single word of it. My pulse stumbled. I opened the thread and scrolled down. There it was, an email address nearly identical to mine, off by just one letter. The signature block carried my name, my credentials, even the mock logo of a program I had never dared to launch publicly. It was all there. My voice, my skin, my mask worn by someone else. I read it once, twice, a third time, as though repetition might rewrite reality. But no, the truth chilled me from the inside out. It wasn't just forgery. It was impersonation. A theft of identity so precise it was meant to erase me completely. And who else could it be? Callista. Of course it was her. I didn't answer Dr. Patel right away. My hands shook too much. Instead, I dug. For hours, I combed through old emails, unearthed file versions, archived voicemails, exported PDFs. Every slide I had drafted, every note I had scribbled, every single name I had once whispered as a potential backer. I had saved them all like a woman unconsciously preparing for war. When the folder was complete, I renamed it Proof Not Permission. I attached it to a reply to Dr. Patel. The message was bare, stripped of any pleasantries. I'm not trying to reclaim the credit. I'm trying to stop the theft. No signature, no warmth. Just the truth sharpened into something finally useful. The next morning, the storm broke. Not in my inbox, but on the internet. A community blog carried the headline, "Rumors Swirl Around Henwick Family Scandal, Billionaire Romance or Manipulation." My stomach dropped as I read. The story was out bleeding into the open, and for the first time, the silence was no longer mine to keep. The article wasn't journalism, it was theater. A thinly veiled piece of gossip stitched together from whispers and anonymous sources, designed less to inform than to entertain. Yet its words cut with precision, framing me not as a professional, not as a builder of ideas, but as a caricature. A woman scheming for wealth, clinging to a man from a richer world, pregnant with the so-called heir to cement her position. And at the center of that performance, Callista. Her quote wasn't overtly cruel. That was her genius. She wrapped her knives in velvet. She's never been great with stability. I just hope the baby grounds her. No accusations, no open malice, just carefully chosen words, pity disguised as concern, condescension hidden behind ribbons of false sympathy. It painted me not as a threat, but as a liability. Someone to be handled, not respected. I scrolled through the comments beneath the article, each one more surreal than the last. Strangers debating my worth. My motives, my body, as if I were a fictional character they could mold into whatever version entertained them most. They speculated about my past, my future, my supposed desperation, as though my life were theirs to script. But then, one comment stopped me cold. A screenshot. A private message from a year ago. Callista to Corwin during a charity event. "Still around you, looked good up there. Miss our talks." He never replied. The thread ended there, one attempt, one silence. But that single screenshot told a story sharper than any headline. I saved it, my fingers trembling slightly on the mouse because I knew I would need it. By noon, I was sitting in the corner booth of a quiet coffee shop, the kind with scratched wooden tables and the constant hiss of steaming milk. My laptop was open in front of me, that screenshot glowing on the screen. My pulse had steadied into something deliberate. That's when Mia walked in. A young journalist, her notebook tucked under her arm, her eyes still carrying the same sharpness I remembered from years ago. Back in school, she had been fearless, covering student protests when most of us were too afraid to even raise our hands. She hadn't changed. We didn't bother with pleasantries. I slid the screenshot across the table, then the folder I'd spent all night compiling emails, drafts, metadata, every piece of proof I had gathered like weapons for a war I never wanted, but could no longer avoid. I don't want a feature piece, I told her, my voice steady, almost detached. I want this to be recorded. Mia didn't hesitate. She simply nodded, placed her recorder between us, and leaned forward. So I spoke. Clearly, deliberately. Not with anger, not anymore. Not even with pain. What came out of me was something else entirely: the refusal to be erased. The refusal to let someone else narrate my life while I stood in the wings like a ghost. They had counted on my silence. They thought they could shape it, control it, use it as a backdrop for their story. But my silence wasn't compliance. It was patience. And patience, when it finally breaks, becomes a weapon. That evening, when I returned home, Corwin had already left for a meeting. On the counter sat an envelope, plain and unremarkable, the kind that usually carries nothing but tax forms or bills. "Something came for you," he had said earlier, half asleep, coffee in hand. Might be junk. I didn't open it until late in the afternoon, my head aching from hours of drafting grant language and staring at the blinking cursor of a business registration form I still wasn't brave enough to submit. Inside was a neatly labeled folder: Henwick Wellness PR Assets. At first, I thought it was harmless, maybe promotional material for Callista's nonprofit. But as I flipped through the pages, my breath caught. Detailed internal talking points, timelines, project scopes. All of it pulled directly, almost word for word, from my original pilot research. The phrasing wasn't just similar, it was identical. On page 6, I froze. My own quote about scalable equity through mobile health units stared back at me, word for word. Even the ridiculous footnote I'd once joked was, "Overkill had been carried over like a watermark of my labor." And then I reached the spreadsheet: projected expansion Southwest region. My name wasn't anywhere on it. Of course it wasn't. But the architecture of every number, every recommendation, every line of logic was mine. Built from my nights of drafting, my days of hustling, my years of believing in something that mattered. And now there it was. Packaged, polished, ready to be paraded under someone else's name. I felt my chest tighten, but not with panic. Not this time. It wasn't fear. It was something colder, sharper, a crystal clear clarity that left every thought precise and unflinching. Someone at Callista's office had sent this package to Corwin's address by mistake. Maybe a clerical error. Maybe fate with a cruel sense of humor. Either way, I didn't rush. I didn't grab it in a flurry. I let the envelope sit for a moment on the counter, studying its plainness, its quiet authority. Then I carefully laid the pages across Corwin's kitchen island. Every sheet, every spreadsheet, every talking point meticulously aligned, ready to be dissected. I opened my laptop, pulled up my cloud archive, and began the slow work of comparison. Dates, phrasing, original file names, metadata. Each tiny detail a thread linking the work back to me. By the time Corwin returned from a meeting, I had built something tangible: a digital folder labeled Proof of Origin, and a list of 12 stakeholders who had once expressed genuine interest in the project when my name had been on it. He leaned over, peering at the screen. "You're not sending this to the press?" he said quietly, suspicion and concern mixed in his tone. "No," I replied firmly. "Not yet." I wasn't looking for headlines, applause, or vindication in public. I was aiming for something quieter, something more precise, a needle piercing, exactly the right moment, not a siren screaming for attention. I drafted a brief, calm note addressed to those 12 contacts. Attached were copies of my original files, metadata, intact timestamps, visible every document, a fingerprint of my authorship. No drama, no pleading, just unassailable facts. 2 days later, I was walking back from the corner grocery store, a bag of tangerines swinging gently in my hand, when a courier appeared in a crisp blazer. He handed me a plain envelope stamped with the return of Henwick and Associates. Inside was a letter, cold, precise, and sharp as an edge: a cease and desist. The words accused me of defamation, brand dilution, and public mischaracterization of institutional ownership. The tone remained professional, meticulous, until the last paragraph. Given the sender's current condition and documented emotional instability, we urge a reevaluation of any future communications or claims. I froze, standing on the front porch as the sunlight waned, fading across the yard in muted golds and grays. My fingers clenched the paper until it creased under the force of my grip. And in that moment, I could hear my mother's voice, plain as day, echoing from a memory I had carefully buried under years of logic and self-preservation. Don't overreact, Honora. That's why people don't trust your judgment. It was the same dismissal repackaged, polished into legal jargon, a warning disguised as concern. That evening, I took the letter to my new attorney, Celia Rhodes, a referral from Corwin's cousin, an expert in nonprofit law. Celia didn't blink once as she read it. She wore a cardigan the color of steel wool, her hair pulled back, and sipped lemon tea while marking the margins with crisp, precise notes. Typical intimidation move, she said, tapping her pen lightly on the words, emotional instability. They want to scare you quiet. I handed her a flash drive containing the organized metadata timestamps, original drafts, everything. She nodded once, methodical, deliberate, and began drafting a reply. 3 paragraphs. Professional. Crisp. Controlled. The final line lingered in my mind. If you wish to proceed publicly, we are prepared to present authorship evidence under oath. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise wrapped in restraint. We didn't file lawsuits. We didn't post anything on social media. We simply sent it to their firm and waited. Their attempt to intimidate me had failed. Silence was never surrender. Then came the pass. A plain white envelope slid under Corwin's door with quiet precision. No sender, no note, just the weight of anticipation in the air. And embossed across the top in gold script were the words, Women in Innovation, Gala, Scottsdale Center for the Arts. Featured speaker, Callista Henwick. At first, I thought it was a cruel joke. But then I saw the RSVP code was active. I held it in my hand, feeling the smooth paper, the gold embossing the invitation that wasn't mine to accept yet. And in that moment, I realized something. This was no longer about proof. It was about choice. And I had mine. Whoever had sent the invitation had registered me as guest of honor strategic contributor. The words settled over me like a quiet, potent charge. I knew exactly what it meant, and I knew exactly who hadn't expected me to use it. Every detail, every deliberate omission, every assumption that I would stay invisible had been noted. The night of the gala, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the dark navy dress I had chosen. It didn't scream for attention. It didn't need to. It fit like armor, hugging my form with understated power. My stomach was a steady weight beneath the fabric, not hidden, not flaunted, just present, undeniable. I wasn't apologizing for it. I wasn't negotiating with it. I simply acknowledged it, and it gave me calm. Corwin dropped me 2 blocks away. I didn't want cameras. I didn't want questions. I didn't want eyes on me except the ones that mattered. I just wanted one moment of truth. Inside the venue pulsed with curated elegance, the kind that costs far more than it appears to. Acrylic name tags glimmered under soft lights. Cocktail napkins bore quotes in looping cursive. Women in heels exchanged compliments that were only half sincere. I stayed at the back, invisible, absorbing everything. Callista stepped onto the stage as though it had been waiting for her alone. Perfect posture, warm voice, lilac power blazer. She opened with a story of perseverance, of risk-taking, and I recognized it immediately. It wasn't hers. It was mine, told in her voice on her timeline. Slide after slide, she walked the audience through Bloomline like she had birthed it herself. The mobile health vans, the grant structure, the painstaking partnerships with 3 clinics I had cold emailed at my own expense, the entire foundation of the program I had spent sleepless nights designing. Every number, every bullet point, every chart gleamed with her polish, her practiced cadence. She was slicker than I remembered. I waited. When the audience was invited to ask questions, I raised my hand but didn't pause for permission. I moved calmly down the side aisle. The tech assistant glanced at me uncertain, and I handed him a USB drive. Slide 5, I said. Timestamp 2021. Author Anara Whitlow. He looked at Callista. She froze. Her smile twitched almost imperceptibly as the screen behind her went dark for a single breath, then lit up with the original Slame deck untouched intact. Metadata, file names, submission dates, email trails, everything. The room held its breath. A woman near the front gasped audibly. A man wearing a badge labeled Institutional Donor blinked and leaned to whisper to his colleague. Silence fell like weight, heavy and unyielding. Callista didn't defend herself. She didn't move. She couldn't. I had spoken through proof. I turned and walked back down the aisle without a word. Not because I had nothing left to say, but because the truth had already spoken where it counted. I didn't need applause. I didn't need confrontation. I only needed acknowledgement, and that acknowledgement had been delivered in the quietest, most unassailable way. Outside, the night had cooled and stilled. I exhaled for the first time in hours, feeling air fill spaces I hadn't realized were tight with tension. Corwin waited near the valet line. He didn't ask how it went. He didn't reach for my hand or offer comfort. He simply looked at me steady and unwavering as if to say I saw the whole thing. I still see you. That quiet steadiness was enough. And then a message came. No name, no preamble. Just an image. My belly taken from across the street the day I left the women's clinic 3 days earlier. My coat slightly open the round curve, undeniable now. Under it, a single line. That child isn't one of us. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I just stared. The photograph wasn't blurry, wasn't a hasty snapshot. Whoever had taken it had waited, had aimed, had held their stillness. And inside me, there wasn't rage. There was something quieter, colder. A stillness sharp and resolute, the kind that comes just before snow falls from a tree branch. It was a calm that carried the weight of storms yet to come, and I felt ready. Corwin walked in a few minutes later, takeout bags in hand, and found me sitting at the kitchen counter, gripping my phone like it was evidence in a courtroom. My eyes didn't leave the screen. Where is it from? He asked gently. His voice soft, careful as though he knew any sudden tone could shatter the fragile calm I had built. IP trace says Henwick residence. I replied without looking up. My fingers traced the edges of the phone nails, pressing into the plastic, steadying myself. Same modem signature as the house's security network. He didn't press further. He didn't need to. He just set the takeout on the counter, the aroma of roasted vegetables and warm bread filling the air, and handed me my laptop with a quiet familiarity. A silent acknowledgement that he understood far more than I had words for. By evening, I found myself in Celia's office, sitting across from her in the sharp, muted light of her downtown suite. In front of me lay a printed screenshot of the message, a meticulously compiled list of call logs, and the clinic security report. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I was exhausted, but it was no longer the kind of exhaustion that clouds judgment or bends the soul. This exhaustion was purposeful, tempered with resolve. It was about boundaries. About finally enforcing them with teeth. Together, we filed a formal complaint under Arizona's digital harassment statutes. I wasn't looking for a lawsuit. I didn't want media attention or public spectacle. I wanted a record, a permanent trace in a file cabinet somewhere under their family name. A reminder that someone had witnessed, documented, and refused to stay silent. They'll know you're not bluffing now. Celia said, her tone clipped precise like the snap of a ruler across a clean sheet. I never was, I said. They just didn't expect me to choose a quieter weapon. The next morning, I opened my inbox to find a message that made my chest tighten. No greeting, no subject line, just one paragraph, cold and clipped. Your sister is unraveling. The donors are asking questions. We've had to pull her from 3 speaking engagements. I know things were said, but family is family. If there's anything left of us, help her. No, I'm sorry we didn't believe you. No, I miss you. No acknowledgement of the years of erasure, of betrayal, of stolen work. Just panic. Just preservation. I read it 3 times, hoping some other truth would surface, hoping the words might rearrange themselves into something recognizable. Something real. They didn't. The truth remained flat, permanent, indifferent. I deleted the message without hesitation. That afternoon, I met Corwin at the notary's office. He arrived with coffee in one hand, a packet of forms for the new foundation in the other. Each page represented a step forward, a reclaiming of space and identity. I signed every single one, carefully, deliberately using the name they had once tried to erase from the family trust. Every syllable mattered. Not a single one altered. The foundation's mission was simple and unwavering: to provide mobile prenatal services for underserved communities, for women who carry what no one sees, who still choose to build. The notary stamped the last document, sliding it across the polished wood desk. "Congratulations," she said. I smiled. Not wide, not soft, just steady. Solid. Rooted. That night back in the apartment, I stood in front of the mirror and pressed a small yellow sticky note to the glass. Written in deliberate script were the words, "This name holds." I turned out the light. The reflection faded, but the truth remained. They could not unwrite what had become. I no longer cared if they saw it, understood it, or acknowledged it. Outside, the soil in my backyard remained stubborn, dry, red, unyielding. But I had learned to work with it, to turn it, feed it, water it in the quiet hours when the sun was still gentle. The citrus tree I had planted in late April had begun to root, tiny green leaves emerging, holding steady. 2 new leaves this week. Leo toddled near by chalk and hand one sock, already missing his laughter, echoing against the brick and clay. The world carried on around us, ordinary and chaotic. And yet, in that patch of stubborn earth, in that small slice of life I had nurtured, I realized something vital I was holding ground to. Corwin sat on the porch steps, coffee in hand, the steam curling lazily into the morning air. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply watched, a quiet presence, as if he understood that some things weren't meant to be directed, only tended. That was the beauty of this place, the garden. The small patch of stubborn earth, the young citrus tree, it required care, not control. I knelt beside the tree, brushing a caterpillar gently off its lowest branch, feeling the roughness of the bark beneath my fingers. Life persisted here quietly, resiliently, without drama or claim. A month ago, I had filed for the nonprofit's tax-exempt status. Last week, the first donation arrived, sent by a women's health clinic in Tucson. They left a message on the form for the quiet ones who do the work while others take the credit. No name. Just that. Later that evening, Corwin slid a folded newspaper across the table. Page 5. The business section. I unfolded it slowly, not expecting fanfare, not wanting spectacle. The article was short, almost understated. Audit reveals irregularities in Henwick Foundation disclosures. The words read like plain facts, not accusations shouted in headlines. Misuse of donor funds, improper attribution of intellectual property, board members quietly distancing themselves from Callista. In the final third, a paragraph named both my parents, Vera and Rainer Henwick, as complicit in approving foundation messaging, despite internal concerns. An anonymous source was quoted. They knew whose work it truly was. I didn't smile. I didn't speak. I just turned the page. There were no calls to deny it, no apologies, no frantic clarifications. That silence, their refusal to engage, spoke louder than any headline ever could. It was a quiet confession resting in the space between words. A week later, an email arrived from a podcast producer I had long admired. She featured stories of women who built legacies out of grief, neglect, or loss. She invited me to speak, to tell my story. I read the message twice, then closed it. Not yet, I decided. Instead, I opened a private audio recording app on my phone. Not for an audience, not for approval, not for applause. Just for the record. My name is Honor Whitlow, I said softly, almost to myself. And I did the work. I ended the recording without saving it. It was mine alone, a quiet acknowledgement to the world I had endured and reclaimed. Later that night, I checked the foundation's donation dashboard. A new comment appeared under a recent contribution. I see you now, and I believe you always did the work. No email attached. No sender. Just a thread of recognition that had found me quietly like sunlight through a crack in the blinds. The next morning, I went to the pantry to find a recipe book my grandmother had left me. I hadn't opened it in years. Between the worn pages near the peach cobbler recipe, she made every Thanksgiving I found a photograph. My grandmother and I, laughing on the front porch, the wind tangling my hair, a dress she had sewn herself hugging me like a second skin. "You look like something you grew yourself," she had said that day. On the back of the photo in her handwriting, "They won't see you right away." Some lights aren't made for living rooms. For the first time in months, tears came not from anger, not from grief, not from loss, but from release. From the understanding that I no longer needed to fight for acknowledgement where it had never existed. Not from them. From me. I stood by the window watching the sun climb higher over the garden. The baby stirred lightly in his nap, a soft movement beneath the fabric of the crib. Corwin stepped in behind me, placing his hand gently on my shoulder. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The quiet solidarity in that touch was enough. It always had been. Some things didn't need words anymore. I didn't fight to belong at their table, in their stories, and their applause. I stopped looking for permission, for validation, for a place that had never truly been mine. Instead, I built a place where I did belong quietly, deliberately, stubbornly. A space that answered only to me. Sometimes survival isn't loud. It isn't a courtroom declaration, a viral post, or applause at the end of a long night. Sometimes survival is simpler, smaller, and yet infinitely more powerful. Sometimes survival is planting your own name in the soil after everyone else tried to erase it, tried to bury it, tried to convince you it was worthless. I spent so long trying to earn a single seat at their table that I forgot I could grow my own garden. That I could tend my own roots, water them in the quiet hours, and let the light reach them on my terms. That realization, small, steady, relentless, was everything. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need an audience, a validation, or a medal. You just need to know your truth, stand in it, and refuse to hand it over to anyone who would try to erase it. Your silence, when rooted in clarity and conviction, can shake the ground louder than any storm. And now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from people who were supposed to protect you, guide you, or love you? What did that journey teach you about yourself? How did you find your own place when no one was holding it open for you? Share your thoughts below. If this story stirred something in you, leave a comment, even if it's just one word, or tell me where you're watching from. If it didn't resonate, that's okay too. I'm still listening. I want to hear your honesty. And if you're someone who believes in the quiet power of resilience, of building a life from the remnants of what was broken, subscribe to this channel. You never know whose life is being rebuilt in silence, whose roots are finding light in hidden corners. Maybe it's you. Because sometimes the most powerful victories don't make a sound. They just grow.